Good afternoon and welcome to our 858 Governance, Administration and Finance Committee. We have a full committee contingent here. Deputy Councillor Martin, Councillor Fowler, Councillor Curtis, Councillor Wilkinson, Councillor O'Neill, Councillor Taylor, and we welcome Councillor Hamill, Gates and Doran. We'll start with confirmation of minutes. Are there any queries about the minutes or someone happy to move that? Councillor Taylor move, Councillor Martin second. All in favour? Great, thank you. Any questions about the forward planning schedule? Councillor Martin.
Thanks, Chair. Just to flow on from our planning committee, I was just seeking a question around the special delegation review item, if we could, when we could expect that to be on the forward calendar.
Through you, Chair, I might just have to take that on notice. We do have some discussions over the next fortnight. However, getting back to you with a definitive date, if you give me 7 days, that'd be great. Thank you.
No other questions? I move the forward planning schedule. Seconder, Councillor Martin. All in favour? Great, thank you. And so we'll go to 6.1, the policy reviews. Do people want a presentation on this? Yes? No? Yes? Yes. Okay.
Thank you. Good afternoon, councillors, through the chair. This report today presents the review of, I think it was 6 policies off the top of my head that we've reviewed over the last month to bring forward to you today. The first policy that we bring forward is the entertainment and hospitality policy. This policy was last reviewed and adopted in 2005. It is a legislative policy that we are required to have under section 196 of the local government regulation. It must be adopted by council. It's not a decision that can be delegated. And the policy has been reviewed. It's been through our executive leadership internally as it applies to both councillors and employees of the city. The primary amendment to the rules of the policy apply to the section in clause 5, which is around the approval of expenditure. Discussions internally in light of some of the initiatives around budget, etc., have resulted in executive general managers taking a leadership role in approving all entertainment and hospitality expenditure across the city. It's been reviewed and updated in line with legislation, and as with all other policies, we've removed all of the procedures and forms. They will still be available. They'll be available operationally through SharePoints and websites.
Councillor Gates.
Thank you, Chairman. If I could just ask a question, and I'm sorry, it may be within the report, but when there's so many policies coming forward and 3 copies of each, it's hard to sort of digest it all. I just wondered, are there still guidelines for appropriate expenditure? I noticed that over the years they had changed and there were guidelines for the amount of money that might be spent per person in some instances, and for alcohol as well. But I couldn't see that that formed any part of the new policy, and I wondered if I missed it.
Through the chair, there's no guidelines around the dollar amount associated with entertainment and hospitality. There is around travel-related expenditure, which we adhere to the ATO guardrails for appropriate expenditure for meals, etc., whilst you're travelling. But there is none in relation to the actual expenditure per person for entertainment and hospitality, which is one of the other reasons it's at an EGM approval level.
So has there been a specific decision to scrap that because it used to form part of the policy? So is there a reason why there's no longer a guideline? And I think the only other question I had was the former policies required consideration of using in-house catering where possible, and I didn't see that in the new policy either.
Yeah. Through the chair, you are correct. I don't recall there being a specific requirement for in-house catering in the policy as such. The only reference would be back to the procurement policy for local suppliers, is to keep within the local supplier rules of the procurement policy. So I can certainly take that on notice if you'd like us to have another look at this policy.
Well, personally, I would. I mean, I think there's a great difficulty for when there's several different policies or acts that need to be reviewed, whereas if it's specific within a single policy, it's far more simple to get the information that might be required. So it's I don't know how, I'm not on this committee, but I thought I would come along and just see what the reasoning was for omitting those things from the new policy.
Through the chair, I was just going to mention, Councillor, we did have a great conversation at ELT on this one, and this is one we particularly wanted to tighten up because we've elevated the approval for expenditure in this area to executive general managers, because previously managers, GMs could make approvals in this space, and we wanted to really curtail the spending, which we thought was higher in the last 12 months than we would ideally like it. So we have tightened this one up quite significantly. So now only EGMs can approve this. Have we got the table, Vanessa, that we is that?
It's in clause 5 of the
last
policy.
Yep. Okay.
So, can we bring the actual report up? Is that possible? Through the chair.
Do you want to just tell us what page it is? Because that probably is a great example of where we've tightened it up. I think that we reduced it to, was it $1,000 or was it $1,000 that we ended up?
No, we ended up taking the limit away, and it was just at EGM approval.
Yes, okay. Yep.
At all limits.
Yep.
So even if it was $20.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So previously, a manager could.
It's on page 59.
Could delegate the expenditure in this area. GMs could. We found that, for meetings, even though the policy stated that, for workshops, etc., you can get food and drinks, etc., we felt that that wasn't the way that the EGMs wanted to see the city's expenditure used, hence why we wanted a consistent approach and to limit to exceptions only the use of entertainment expenditure. So is that the one? Yeah.
Page 59 has the
updated table.
Sorry, through the chair. Page 59 has the, in clause 5, has the approval table.
So before it said employees would be either the general manager, and we've dropped that out now. So it's just the executive general manager.
Yeah, I did see that in the report. I just didn't see a suggested guideline for expenditure, which I personally believe is appropriate. And the in-house catering. I think when we've got hotter and we've got access to food right on site here in particular, it would have been preferable to use that service wherever possible. Just a comment.
Through the sorry. Through the chair, I'm happy to add in a clause in relation to in-house catering and have a look at that one to make sure that we've picked it up. Just in relation to the guidelines or the guardrails that we have around the expenditure limits, I'm anticipating the one that you're referring to is the one on page 53 of the agenda, which talks to what might be considered reasonable expenditure limits for entertainment and hospitality. And if I could point out that particular table does reference the dollar amounts are aligned with the corporate travel and accommodation policy, and they are taken from the ATO. The reason that we've sort of tried to remove dollar figures from policies is so that we can actually apply those ATO rates every year and we don't have to go back and amend the policy document, because this in itself would be quite dated. Whereas if we actually just refer to what the ATO guardrails are, which change from year to year, then that means we don't have to go back and review the policies. So that's the approach that we've taken with all of the policies. But if you'd like us to have a look at that.
Confused, if I might say, because on page number is it 76, there's the amended record, and like the sums are vastly different, from much more on that than is being proposed in the new on page 59, like up to $100 on food and $20 per person on alcohol. There was no alcohol limit, was there, on the new schedule on page 59?
Correct. So the table on page 59 relates to recommended expenditure limits for entertainment and hospitality, and the one there on page 77 relates to attachment E to the current documents, which is inbound delegations. So that's more about those international relations inbound delegations that are facilitated as a civic delegation.
So there were several tables.
Correct.
As we went through, and I simply wondered why there was such a contrast and why it had been decided to no longer include that reference point. That's all.
Yeah.
And I still don't know.
Well, if I, just so that I can clarify for myself, so it sounds like with the reference to the ATO guardrails, we still have recommended amounts, but we're not going to put the dollar figure in case ATO changes it next year. But it is, you need to go and have a look at ATO. And then if you're going outside that, then you need to have a reason for going outside that.
You would need to, through the chair, you would need to seek approval from the relevant decision maker if you wanted to go outside those relevant thresholds. A part of us implementing the policy project, a big part of this is about education and training across the city. We do have a team actually working on all of the attachments in relation to this and the way that we communicate broadly with our staff and the people that need to both implement and use this policy across the city, which includes yourselves as well, and trying to make sure that we actually communicate that information in a way that is easily understood. So we've got a team that are currently working specifically on the entertainment and hospitality proposed policy changes to make sure the forms are as contemporary and up to date as they can be, that they're accurate, and that the information that we share internally with our people, our councillors and our employees, it makes sense to them as well, so that we've actually got it in a easily understood format.
On the other point that Councillor Gates raised of using our internal catering if possible, I don't know whether I necessarily agree with that. I think we should be commercial if we can, but I just wanted to know, is that something you wanted to raise and suggest to the committee they consider?
No, I'm not on this committee, as I said, but I just wondered why, when it would be a return to council, if we used our own services rather than going external where possible, and it used to be the case that where possible, internal service provision would be considered as the first option, and it's no longer there. And my question was, why was that decision taken to remove it? Was there any specific reason to remove it, or no?
No.
Might be, but
Sorry, what's that? So
Councillor
sorry,
Hamill
if
just-
something's removed from the policy, there must be a reason why we remove it, right?
To be honest, we reviewed this one quite a number of months ago, so I can't recall off the top of my head why there would have been a specific and targeted strategy to remove that particular clause from the policy. I'd have to take it on notice and go back and look at the history for that.
I'm comfortable with the policy as is, but if committee members would like to see that included back in, then if someone wants to put that forward. Councillor Hamill?
Chair, I was interested in the decision for this to go back to EGMs for sign-off. Of the million things an EGM could be doing with their time, I guess I'm a little bit confused as to why this would go back to EGMs, and I could appreciate if maybe managers removed and GMs were left with it, but is there a little bit more detail of why we felt this being on the list of tasks for EGMs to deal with when you have so much other things you could be directing your time towards?
Susan, do you want to? Okay.
Yeah, through you, Chair. Resulting in the EGM approval is probably predicated by the direction that we've now provided, which is we don't expect to see too much entertainment and hospitality. So whilst the approval itself might take us a minute or so, I expect the volume of those approvals to significantly reduce as a result of the directive that we've provided with the team.
Chair, and I appreciate that response from Paul. It just takes me back to when the CEO came on board and things like, CEO was signing off on new employees being giving security badges, like that. They're redundant processes that are just a not effective use of time, and if that, I'll take that as it is, and that's the decision of ELT. But yeah, just a little bit surprising to hear something like that in the weeds being put back in EGM's things.
Councillor Fowler?
Thank you, Chair. And through you, I just had a question around contractors because I noticed that in the revised new policy, they've been omitted. So was that intentional or is there a specific reason for that change? So if you go to page 58 on the new policy, in the scope, this policy, that's there. There's no mention of contractors. I was just wondering if that was intentional or not.
Through the chair, I'm going to take that as an omission. So it should apply to those people that we contract through as employees of the city as opposed to the procurement process. So it should apply to those people as well.
I'll leave it with.
Do we need to include that then?
Add that back in?
Yeah, I'm happy to add that back in and share that with you prior to council if you like.
Thank you, Councillor Fowler.
And the other one I had was just similar to Councillor Hamill's as the approvals. I shared the same concerns and I was wondering if we should consider a tiered approach. So where it might be a $500 amount goes to a GM approval, anything above that is an EGM. But again, I take your advice that it might not be as big a volume as what we think it is.
Through you, Chair, look, we're absolutely happy to consider it, but as the EGM collective, we didn't think it was going to be such an impasse on our time.
I just had one last one, if that's okay, Chair. Just my other feedback on this policy was just around the alcohol provision. Mm-hmm. So we had the previous alcohol in the workplace policy that's now retired. Is there a current policy or framework that guides alcohol use at council functions? I'm thinking about a workplace health and safety perspective, from a risk reputational perspective. Do we feel like something should be added back into this policy about that, or is there another policy that speaks to that?
Through the chair, there is no other specific targeted policy that speaks to that, but under workplace health and safety, it is at the decision of the CEO if alcohol is included in any workplace functions held for staff in the city.
Okay.
Any other questions about that one? Councillor Martin?
Thanks, Chair. My question was around Clause 6 in the new policy. Given this policy applies to councillors and council staff, I'm just seeking clarity on whether that, from a councillor perspective, they're unnecessarily restricts us. I guess I'm thinking that if councillors are required to seek prior approval before they add anything to the credit card, that I'm thinking about the threshold, that if it's a significant expense, I understand, but would this not perhaps tangle up some of the smaller events that councillors are either buying tickets to a function? This policy, Clause 6, as I understand it, seeks that we request through the Mayor or the CEO.
Through the Chair. I'd have to take that question on notice as to how the corporate credit cards or the credit cards for councillors are actually working. But it is designed to try and reduce and avoid these types of charges being put onto council corporate credit cards.
Sorry, through the Chair, just to clarify that one. So the current policy requires approval, I think it's either by the Mayor or the CEO, so that's already in place. So that's not a new requirement to get approval. The purpose of that Clause 6, my understanding, is that you need to have the approval first before you go and spend the money. That's the intent. So it's just saying you can't use your purchase card to buy it unless you have approval to spend, if subject to the prior authorisation.
Councillor Gates.
Can I just clarify, the use of our corporate credit card is related to the councillors' expenses and reimbursement policy. So the guidelines for our usage of the corporate credit card relate to that policy, and we're all aware of our limitations. For example, $100 for raffle tickets and no donations, and we can purchase 2 tickets to things. So it's a different policy that guides our use of our corporate credit cards.
Yeah.
And that was my understanding, which is, but I feel like this, in a way, crosses over that and confuses that a little. So I'm just, it's just my thoughts anyway.
Can you just point to where you think it does?
Well, if our expenses and reimbursement policy relating to councillors and use of credit card and budgets attached to that outlines that cost, but then this, I guess, in terms of requiring pre-approval for every expense, if it relates to entertainment and hospitality, does that not confuse the two policies?
Yeah, I'm somewhat confused now, because my understanding was the same as Councillor Gates, that we come under a different guideline and policy, but you've just said that this was intended to take in councillors as well.
So, through the Chair, the easiest way to explain it is the councillor support policy provides the expenses entitlements for councillors. So it says that you can have certain limits for incidental type expenses or for travel expenses, professional development, those things. So it's the policy that gives the types of expenditure that you, or the buckets of expenditure that councillors may access, and it's the policy that guides what is provided up front versus what's claimable as a reimbursement expense. I can't remember the details off the top of my head in relation to the provisions of that policy on the credit cards. I'd have to come back to you with some more details around that, but it's the tool by which you can buy things in accordance with that councillor support policy. The way that works with this policy is one of those things that you might buy is entertainment and hospitality expenditure, and this sets the rules by which the types of things are claimed as entertainment and hospitality. And one of the reasons, obviously, for that is so that we can make sure as an organisation we're recording those types of expenditures on our financial transactions correctly, so we've got the right FPT, claimable and non-claimable expenses as well. So that's one of the reasons, but it's also about making sure that when we're buying entertainment and hospitality, we're not putting ourselves into positions where we're buying it as a matter of influence, I suppose is a good way to put it, but it's buying it for a legitimate business reason of the city. So your councillor support policy says you can buy things. If you're buying entertainment and hospitality, this policy says the rules around which apply.
Councillor Gates.
So it might be, for example, if, outside of our own policy, that it might be if we wanted to put on a morning tea or an evening supper or something where information was being provided to the community, we would refer to this policy and get approval for that, and it would not impact on the councillor's other corporate credit card that is for specific use.
Absolutely.
Right.
Thank you.
If I could give you an example and you could tell me where we're at. So just this week, Councillor Wilkinson, we had a meeting on site at Churn Park with some officers, and we had to sit down for an hour and go through our plans, and we ordered a coffee for the officer. So would that now require a sign-off via EGM for that because we are entertaining an officer during a meeting? Well, yes. Can I just clarify?
In accordance with the entertainment and hospitality policy, that should be recorded.
Okay, I don't know whether that's workable. No. Okay, so let's, perhaps if we defer this one and we do a bit of work on it, do you think? Or if we are comfortable, I think that's the best way.
Yeah. I would agree.
Okay.
Happy to defer the policy and do an online workshop with you if you'd like.
Okay. Let's do that. Whilst we're going through these, I've got 2 change recommendations on 2 of the other policies as well. But I think we'll just continue going through all of them before we get to the end. Thank you.
Oops, sorry. All right. Through the chair. The next policy that was reviewed, and this one has been under review for a number of months as well internally, as it's been quite a complex matter, and we've certainly sought some external advice from the Ombudsman to make sure that what we're presenting you today is the intent of both the Local Government Act and the requirements of the Ombudsman's Office. So this was originally adopted back in 2005 with a last major review undertaken in 2016. One of the reasons there is quite a bit of change to this policy that's in front of you today is because it doesn't quite reflect the way that we're operating on a day-to-day basis, the current policy. So a lot of work has gone into making sure that the revised and updated policy reflects the way that we're operating and managing complaints across the city. The revised policy, the Local Government Act is quite specific about stating that the policy incorporates the procedures on this one. So this is a little bit out of the ordinary in terms of our policy framework. And they do require that the relevant procedures to this one are actually incorporated for adoption by council, and they're also published on our website out to the community and our external stakeholders. The biggest change or the clarification that we've definitely put into the policy itself is quite high level and very principles based, and you'll find a lot more detail in terms of the complaints management process in the 2 procedures attached, which is the Administrative Action Complaints Procedure. It's important to note with this one, it's a 3-tiered approach to complaints management, and the Penalty Infringement Notice Review Procedure, which is attached, and that's a 1-tier review approach. The Penalty Infringement Notice Procedure has been around administratively for quite a lengthy period of time. The tables contained within that procedure are readily available on our public website out to the community, and there's no proposed changes to the content within that table to the document that's in front of you today. based on the advice from the Queensland Ombudsman, it's being presented for council endorsement, whereas it's been an administrative policy in the past. The original templates, the operational templates, and the work instructions for the individual teams within the city have been removed. So it's very much an outward focused procedure. These are the steps that council takes if you make a complaint, an administrative action or other type of complaint. And our city website does have a lot of really good information available for our customers in relation to our complaints management policies, and this is what's been presented to you today is in line with that public facing information. I'm happy to take any questions on this one.
Councillor Fowler.
Thank you, Chair, and through you I thought the changes were quite good on this one. I just had two small amendments to be considered. So for councillors, it's on page 105. So my first was to add a line under clause 3 about maintaining internal tools for consistent handling. So I think the policy removes references to forms and templates, which is fine because they're managed internally, but I'm suggesting that we acknowledge them in the policy. So my suggestion is that under 3E that we add a new 3F, and it just says, what 3 says is council facilitates the effective management of complaints by, and then F would be maintaining internal guidance materials and tools to support consistency in complaint handling across all departments. So it just acknowledges that. I'd be happy to provide the text.
Beautiful, thank you.
If councils like the suggestion. So the second suggestion I had is just adding a sentence about staff training and just editing that. So clause 3B, so where we say ensuring that training is provided to employees, I thought we should just benefit from a bit of a clearer commitment to ongoing or refresher training. So perhaps a revision of 3B could be ensuring that initial and ongoing training is provided to employees responsible for complaint handling. So it's just a little bit more specific, but I thought it was really good. Those were just two suggestions.
Happy to take them on board through the chair.
We'll continue. Thanks.
Beautiful. Thank you through the chair. The next one is the information management policy. Again, it's been quite an interesting process going back and getting the history on a couple of these IT related policies. This one was first established back in 2006. And there's been a bit of change over the years from it being council to administrative policies. It's been very difficult to understand the reasons why, other than a significant review of our IT area of the business back in around about 2016, 17. This one then changed back. So it was a lot of the policies were organisational, they went council. This was then changed back to a council policy in 2019, which coincided with the release of the first state government-driven councillor code of conduct. The policy itself is not legislatively required. A lot of the, all of the rules in relation to records management are clearly outlined in the Records Management Act. In addition to that, the state, the Queensland Archivist actually publishes a lot of guidance information on how we manage, maintain, retain and dispose of records in the city. The State Archivist does recommend in those guidelines that we do have a policy, but it's not legislatively required. Through the chair, it's for that reason that we have drafted a policy and put before you today.
So through conversation in pre-briefing for this committee, I prepared a change recommendation that we don't have this policy, because it does seem to be a bit of a double up that they're saying we think you should have it, but we've already got that information, and it appears that officers do actually support that. And the reason why they created the draft was because the state says, oh, maybe you should have one, but it's not a legislative requirement. But I'll just open that and see what people think about that. Councillor Doran.
Just to ask the officers why the state government suggests that it should be in place, even though it's not legislatively required, Councillor Patterson, but why do they say it should be in place, so we should have one?
Through the chair, we have this occur quite a lot, and it's a matter that I've certainly raised internally for a bit of discussion in whether it be state or federal agencies that publish guidelines for local governments, and as part of those guidelines, one of the first, I suppose, control mechanisms that they go to is for us to put in place policies. I can't answer the why, but I can give you definitely some examples. So the Queensland State Government, as an example, recommends that we have a policy on drones, but we've got CASA and a federal government agency that put the guardrails and legislation in place around that. We have, there was a recommendation recently from the Queensland State Local Government Department for councils to have a policy on ex gratia payments. But the City of Gold Coast in particular, we've got our own insurance company and we've got some very good guardrails around assessing those on a merit-based, individual case-based. So it's quite a common scenario for state governments to recommend councils have policies on quite a lot of things. But from our assessment in relation to this one, the legislation's very strong. The legislation's very clear, as well as the state archivist's own guardrails that they put out in relation to this matter.
Forgive me, Chair. Is it the city officer's recommendation that we remove it, or is that the change that you?
Yeah. So the recommendation that's come to council is that we do include it.
Yeah.
Purely because the state said we should, even though some officers in state saying, oh yeah, you know, it's like a protection for themselves. When we've got that legislation that's very strong, that's really what we're probably going to rely on anyway. So when we were discussing this, I was like, do you really think this should be? I was like, well, no, it's only because the state said, but we don't actually think that it's essential. So that's why I'm proposing the change, and it's supported by the officers to have that change.
Yeah, okay. Thanks.
The next,
I can see how the officers are obliged to present that to council if the state's got that. Yeah. Okay, are we okay to move on from this one? And I'll be putting up the change recommendation that we retire the policy. Any other questions on this before we move to the next one? Nope. Okay, let's move on.
Thank you. The next one is another IT-related policy, and this is our cybersecurity policy. This was originally established back in 2001, and it was at a time where cybersecurity probably wasn't very mature out there in the broader community, and it was very much a policy that tried to address security around passwords, IT access, and network access, remote access, those types of matters. The policy is not required legislatively, but it does actually help us mitigate one of our strategic risks, which is our cybersecurity risk. It is the purpose, as I said, the original policy was very much focused on our IT systems, and the policy that's been reviewed and presented to you today has been revised to broaden that, and it talks about our broader cybersecurity obligations and requirements, particularly as it applies to our members of the community and also to our assets and infrastructure. It was changed to a council policy back in 2020, and again that was because it was identified as an emerging strategic risk for the city, and that's why we're recommending that that policy is retained and the revised policy has been put before you today.
Any questions on that before we move on? No. Okay, let's go.
Thank you. And the last group of policies, which we have reviewed these policies together, the beneficial enterprises and controlled entities policies. You might recall we presented these to you through committee back in January, I think it was, of this year. And the recommendation that from Council and GAF at that point in time was to defer the consideration of these policies subject to receiving the services and funding agreements for the invest and brand controlled entities. We understand that they have been put forward through Council last month, and we're bringing these two particular policies back to you for consideration to retire. The primary reason that we're recommending that these two policies be retired is the legislation changed significantly on the back of some of the big CCC inquiries into local government 4 or 5 years ago, maybe longer. And a lot of the provisions and the rules for the establishment, for the notifying, etc., of controlled entities has been strengthened in the Local Government Act in the regulations. And in addition, with beneficial enterprises, we've got some quite stringent rules around defining what a beneficial enterprise is and reporting on those through our annual reports each year. So again, it's primarily on the basis that we felt that the legislation was strong enough to retire these policies.
On this one, I'll just add that I also have a changed recommendation on this one, and that is I would really like to get input from our Audit and Risk Committee on this policy before we retire it, given we are effectively transferring a lot of control away with the controlled entities, and the policy as it stands is referring to elements of how it's set up and the like. But I think there's possibly other things that we may want to have in there as policy relating to what we do. So I don't think it hurts timing-wise. Take it to the next Audit and Risk Committee and get them to make a recommendation to this committee. Thank you.
I just had through you, Chair, I had a thought about this, and it was a lot of reading. So, but I guess my concern with this, I support the retirement of the beneficial enterprise, but then I thought, what if there is any future partnership opportunities that the city is looking to explore? Is it covered under the legislation, or do we need a? And so where I landed, Chair, was actually a combination of the two, and maybe it's a new policy that it could be called the controlled entities and partnerships policy, but it was where the parts that we don't want to lose combined to actually just for those future opportunities. So we're looking at our controlled entities, and we have service and funding agreements, and that's all in place, and that's great. But what if there's other things in the future that we are looking at? Are we governed enough under the legislation, or do we feel? And I think I support the audit and risk advice there, but that was where I landed, was that maybe it's a combination of the two, and the parts we don't want to lose from the benefits becomes a controlled entities and partnerships policy.
Question, do you think that's a viable option, or do you think we're best off treating them separately, or do you think that's workable?
Through the Chair, if the committee is supporting that recommendation to go to the Audit and Risk Committee, I'd probably recommend to allow that to happen. And we can certainly take on board and have a look at the same time as the other situations. There are a couple of other matters that I know from a policy perspective that we could look at in conjunction with this. So we could certainly look to have some internal conversations around that, and potentially a councillor workshop if that was the case. Okay. We'd like some guidance on what rules you'd like to see in that policy if that was the case.
Yeah, I'm thinking on the timing of that. I want to make sure that it's valuable to the Audit and Risk Committee, that we're kind of giving them the thoughts from this committee, what we want you to have a look at, and then bring recommendations back. So do you think that would work if you take on those ideas prior to, if there's a committee decision for Audit and Risk to tell us what they think about it, just to put up a few different options and they come back? Does it make sense?
Through the Chair, I'd advocate if we could have that workshop before we take the report.
Prior. Okay, great.
That would be great.
Okay, so we're looking at a workshop on this one, and then go to audit and risk before coming back. Everybody aligned with that idea? It seems like a lot, but it's a really, really critical area from a risk and governance area for us. Yes, Councillor Fowler?
Chair, if I may, just one other comment with my thoughts on that. I just think retaining a public-facing policy, it just reinforces accountability, particularly around council decisions to enter business-like arrangements with public funds. I just think it's a good policy to have.
I tend to agree. I'd like to see this policy kept. The reason why I want to take it to audit and risk is there things that we're missing or that they think would be valuable to add into the policy as well?
Thanks, Chair. No concerns with it going to audit and risk. I'd just say, is it the intent? I think we should share the funding and services agreement too, because having been closer to this policy, we've got this policy, which is a couple of pages, but the actual funding and services agreement is a really long document. So having oversight of that, I know that there's a lot more controls in that document and levers, but I'd just say, so I'm supportive of it going to audit and risk, but if we could give both, and they might be able to provide a bit more nuanced advice.
Any other questions on that one? Okay, so we might go to the amended recommendation. So changes would be 1A is deferred. And B, we're looking at, what were we looking at? We weren't looking at a deferral for B. We were looking at an amendment. They were Councillor Fowler's amendments. So sorry, there's a change of, 1A is now missing. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, so we defer entertainment and hospitality policy. And Vanessa, when we're doing the workshop, we can throw that one in the mix and have a chat about that one as well. That we retire the information policy as well as, actually we take out the beneficial enterprise policy as well. We don't retire that one, so we take that out of, so it's just 2A for retirement information policy, information management policy. Yep. Council refers the controlled entities policy. Vanessa, does it make sense that we send the beneficial enterprise policy along with that? Okay. So to point 4, we include the controlled entities policy and the beneficial enterprise policy. Yep. Referred to Audit and Risk Committee, and we'll have a workshop on that as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, clear as mud. Any questions? Councillor Curtis.
Thanks, Chair. I'm just a little bit uncomfortable with the information policy one. I'm really, really supportive of eliminating redundancy and getting rid of policies that aren't required, but I'm a bit uncomfortable with a report that's recommended that it be retained with commentary such as that attachments to the policy are valuable and will remain guiding information for all employees, rah-de-rah. And then we've come to committee and then been told that it can be retired, but I don't have a report to support that. And I was just seeing, as I really don't want to defer another one, but I just need a bit more robust explanation as to, like, I understand that it was a state government recommendation, but that's not what's reflected in the report. And so the flip on the floor is just, I need some support.
So, Ms. Green, if I may, could you first answer, if the state hadn't done that, what would your recommendation be? And then if you can also comment on what you think, if that's not a concern to council that we just create a policy because the state says we should create a policy, are there reasons that you see of value of holding this policy anyway?
Through the chair, I think it's definitely been a challenging one for us to work with stakeholders in terms of what does the content of this policy actually address. Because when we looked at the legislation and when we looked at the standards, etc., there probably wasn't a lot that was left. So we could have really gone either way with this particular policy. I suppose the reason that it was recommended, which is as per what's in the report, is because it was a recommendation from the State Archivist to retain a policy that guides information management in the city. It could go either way. Our policy framework says we won't have policy where the legislation says, or it's got the strong rules in it. We won't duplicate or have policies just for the sake of it. So we decided, I suppose, at the end of the day, to put that decision to council as to whether you wanted to retain that policy or not.
Just a follow-up, may I ask if there was any debate on it during the ELT review of these policies? Did it get raised and questioned there?
It's true. Through the chair. Not all policies, in line with some of the comments that you made earlier around pushing those decision-making down, so not all policies that are presented to council go through the whole of IT. So a lot of these are either supported at manager or general manager level across the city, the people that are responsible for managing and implementing these functions on a day-to-day basis. So this particular policy hasn't been to ELT as a whole.
Councillor Wilkinson.
Thank you, Chair. And through you, I'm just trying to clarify. So in summary in my head, we could retain it, but it would be more or less a duplication from what the state is already saying. But is there any immediate harm in retaining it should it exist? I guess being put forward, it's obviously clear that it can be there. There's this kind of sense that it possibly doesn't need to be there, but by all means, if it's a recommendation by the state to have it, even though it may be a duplication, I don't necessarily see it as them being a problematic policy to still retain. Is that a fair, I guess, summarisation of that conversation?
Yeah, I may start on that. So the work that Paul brought to this committee from 2 years ago was, with Vanessa, is we've got all these policies, we've got all this double up. If anywhere the legislation does it, let's get rid of them. Okay, so there's not necessarily a negative, except that was kind of our whole intent of looking at all of our policies, get them up to speed, and then if anything is double up with legislation, we get rid of it. Paul, do you want to make any comment further on that?
Through you, Chair, no. Other than I completely understand where you're coming from. So ultimately, it's up for you to decide if it stays. I personally don't think there's any harm in it either being removed or being there. There's no impediment whatsoever either way.
And I'm pretty agnostic about it. It just seemed it didn't need to be there. But if everybody wants to keep it, then we'll keep it. It's not a big deal. It's just another one. It's like culling at home, right? This is one that we can cull and we don't lose anything out of it. Yep, Councillor.
Thank you, Chair, and I appreciate your comments on that as well. I guess the difference in this context was just in relation to what the state recommendation was to have one in comparativeness to other policies. That was only my main kind of. I realise the direction that we've been going in, and I appreciate that, and I think we're doing a good job compacting our policies at the city. But just in relation to this one, I tended to understand where Councillor Curtis was coming from in the questioning of it, and like I said, I appreciate your response, Paul, and again, I can see that it could either stay or go. It doesn't appear to me that it really matters either way, in which case I'm comfortable enough with the current recommendation, but if it were to stay, I'd also be comfortable enough with that, so I appreciate that.
Any other questions or comments on this before we get to...
Sorry, Chair, just my personal view that since the officers on page 29 suggest or recommend that council adopts the information management policy. I would personally prefer that it be retained rather than retired, because it, as Councillor Wilkinson suggested, it does no harm being there. It is a recommendation, so
Okay, there's enough interest in this, so let's just take that one out and we'll put that back one. So what is that? We'll put that back.
It's the revised information management policy attachment 11.
Adopts the following.
Be adopted.
Yeah, okay, great. Okay, have I got a seconder for that recommendation? Councillor Martin. Okay, so just speaking to this recommendation, the city has many policies, and we have been trying to make those as efficient as possible without losing meaning, but ensuring that there's not double up where there is legislation. By doing that, the policies that are left actually have more power, because there's not like a policy for every single thing in the city. The policies that we've referred to today, we are adopting the complaints management policy, the administrative action complaints, penalty infringement, cybersecurity and information management policies as have been presented to us. We seek to defer the policy on entertainment and hospitality while we get a little bit more clarity about how that interrelates with the councillor expense policy. And with related to the controlled entities policy, we're going to do a little bit more work on that via a workshop to get the ideas from councillors and also from our external independent experts on the Audit and Risk Committee. Anyone else wish to speak to it for or against? No? Okay, we'll take a vote on that one. All in favour? Against? Great. Okay, so the next item is a closed session item. I have a changed recommendation for 7.1. Are there any questions which people would like to go into closed for?
Sorry, I'm still catching up.
My changed recommendation doesn't really need going into closed for. If you could put that up.
Oh, for God's sake. Keep losing my spot.
But if anyone wants a presentation or the like, we can. No, okay. So the change recommendation that I've requested is just in terms of reporting to this committee to provide us not only that moment in time, but to give us a bit more of a longer term perspective when we're looking at, so we can make sense of how does this, fit into a broader picture. So that future quarterly rates and water debt management reports for the committee include a comparison to historical city arrears figures and a comparison to other Southeast Queensland councils where available. So we're not looking at an evaluate in a vacuum. We can compare it to what's gone before, and we can compare it to other councils. Have I got a seconder for that recommendation? Councillor Fowler? Yes.
I certainly understand the comparison with historical city arrears, but I'm not sure that we need to go to the extent of
Southeast Queensland.
To Southeast Queensland.
Well, that was actually that was a recommendation from the officers when I suggested why don't we look. So we're looking at how do we make all the reports that come to this committee a little bit more digestible, and comparisons make that. So maybe if I can through you to use on the why it was thought that might be valuable as well.
Okay.
Yeah, looking at other SEQ councils is a bit of a benchmark for where we're tracking as compared to those other councils. It is a little tricky sometimes to get comparable information from other SEQ councils, so that's hence the reason for putting the where available in there. But if it is information we can get and we think that it's a fair comparison, it's something that can add value to let you know where we sit relative to other SEQ councils.
Any other questions or comments? Okay, I'll take my open as a close, and all in favour? Okay, great. Good-o, that was short and sweet. And to our final 7.2, sale of land, are there any questions about this item that people need to move into close for?
Has this been increasing on year upon year, or we sort of round about similar numbers per division?
Through you, Chair. It varies year to year. This number is actually a little bit lower than previous resolutions we've sought. This one we're only seeking resolution on 73 properties.
I'm just wondering if we need to go into close to discuss any further.
No, I'm
Okay,
happy to keep it general. Yes. No, we're not seeing this increasing. It does vary year on year and resolution by resolution, but this one's on the lower side.
Councillor Fowler?
Thank you, Chair. I actually do need to go to close. Sorry, that's what I was trying to get your attention. If I could go to close to ask a question,
yes,
please.
happy to go to close for the reason pursuant to section 254J, matter of local government required to be kept confidential. I move that. Seconder, Councillor Wilkinson, all in favour? Okay, thank you. Okay, so we've considered that one. Do I have a mover for that recommendation? Councillor O'Neill, seconder, Councillor Curtis. Do you wish to speak to it, Councillor O'Neill? No. All in favour? Great, thank you. That concludes our meeting, but we do have a bit of an update if you want to stick around just after the meeting. So I call the meeting closed at 2:35. Thanks.